Spies like EU by ADM Collingwood. In January of 1963, Nicholas Elliot travelled to Beirut. Upon arriving, he instructed his MI6 subordinates to prepare an apartment with listening devices and to post watchers at the doors and on the street outside. Then he invited his best friend round for tea. Kim Philby knew why Elliot had asked him for the meeting: to extract a confession, to find out the extent of Philby's betrayal. However, as Ben McIntyre wrote in A Spy Among Friends, Philby had played the game brilliantly for 3 decades, and he needed to find out how much Elliot knew, even if it meant risking arrest. Over tea in the wired apartment, the two old friends engaged in an exquisitely genteel conversation, lying courteously to one another, as part of an ancient English ritual that was in fact an unsparing, bare-knuckle fight. Elliot got the confession, but Philby demurred when asked to sign a written statement. He promptly slipped his surveillance and escaped to Moscow, leaving the British intelligence community already blinking in confusion after a series of defections had thrown open the curtains on the extent to which it had been in the dark about Soviet penetration. Entirely discombobulated, it took weeks for them to fully recover. The Cambridge Five, of which Philby was the dazzling star, had all attended Britain's elite educational institutions. However, what unified them and the other traitors, such as George Blake, who died last year in Moscow, was a belief that communism was a better way of organising society than the liberal democracy. Such men seem to have thought that almost any action was justified if it would hasten the arrival of the inevitable socialist state. The interwar years and the Great Depression presented the NKVD with a bounty of low-hanging fruit to be harvested. During this period, the Soviets recruited the trade unionists, the immature scions of the British establishment, and, if we believe Peter Wright, politicians who eventually provided access to the most sensitive reaches of the British state. For the first time in 40 years, Britain exists in a Cold War world. Our close relationships with the US and Australia make us look a target for Chinese espionage. At the least, its sophisticated cyber capabilities threaten our intellectual property, industries, infrastructure, and command and control systems. Yet this is well known. What is perhaps less widely considered is the effect on our national security of leaving the European Union. Whichever type of Brexit we might have personally hoped for, and I know for a fact I didn't get the one I hoped for, or whether we wanted to leave the EU at all, the sovereign will of the British people, as expressed by the Crown in Parliament, was to end ECJ supremacy in UK law, regain the power to decide how many EU citizens enter and live in the UK, free the British state from single market regulations, and recover the authority to sign deals independently, while retaining as much access to EU markets as possible. These negotiations with the European Union were lengthy and fractious. By definition, that the EU's aims were different to ours. They still are. This is also true across a range of diplomatic, economic, and security matters unrelated to Anglo-European relations. Given these sometimes divergent national interests, perhaps it is time MI5 asks itself just what the implications are of having so many members of Parliament, the civil service, the intelligence community, the judiciary, influential think tanks, trade unions, regulatory authorities, and the media, who openly pledge fealty to Brussels. They appear to be convinced, like Philby and Blake, that British society will be better organised in different hands, and that they are therefore justified to push the UK in their preferred direction. In May 2019, the Telegraph reported that Tony Blair had been secretly advising the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, on how to force Britain to stay in the EU. He also previously met the European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker for private talks about negotiating with Britain over Brexit. As a former Prime Minister and still extraordinarily well connected, we might therefore wish to know what Mr. Blair advised President Macron. Did he provide broad tactical advice or specific information? How frequently did they meet or correspond? On behalf of whom was Mr. Blair acting? How did his contact with the President of France and the European Commission dovetail with his involvement in the People's Votes campaign, which sought to overturn the original referendum? What information did President Macron provide Blair? On the 7th of March 2019, Dominic Grieve, then a Conservative Member of Parliament and Privy Council member as chairman of the Intelligence and Security Committee, met with Nathalie Loiseau, the then French Minister of European Affairs, to discuss how the May government might be forced to extend Article 50. Mr. Grieve was a leader of the parliamentary efforts to delay, frustrate or prevent Brexit. To this end, he tabled several amendments to the government legislation, proposed that funding for all government activities be blocked unless time was made available for a parliamentary vote he wanted, and even co-authored a Labour Party amendment designed to prevent a so-called no-deal Brexit, when in November 2016 Mr. Grieve was awarded the Legion of Honour of the French Republic, France's highest honour, military or civilian. The French ambassador to Britain said, "Cher Dominique, you provide a vital link between our two countries. In the peculiar time we're living in, your role is more important than ever." Important to whom? These meetings were in plain sight. However, on the 9th of March 2018, the London School of Economics hosted a private seminar attended by European diplomats and British civil servants. The Sun reported that Alistair Brockbank, the then defence advisor to the Cabinet Office, told the seminar that Britain stood ready to continue paying significant contributions to the common EU defence and foreign policy projects, adding, "We are interested in it all." Brexit Central wrote that he also told the attendees that the UK was always planning to have no gap in the UK's subordination to EU foreign and security policy, including EU defence policy. Quote, "Given the government had told Parliament that it would not be part of any EU defence and foreign policy structures, it was perhaps accurate of Victoria Billing, now Her Majesty's Ambassador to Senegal, but then Deputy Director of the Department of Exiting the European Union, to say at the seminar that the defence and foreign policy deal sought by the UK is a Kit Kat, whose public face was chocolate, hiding the depths of the continued agreement. This, according to the Sun's account of the seminar, sparked mocking laughter, but it also stoked enough outrage in one attendee for him to leak the recording to the UK press. Predictably, MPs in favour of leaving the European Union responded furiously. Jacob Rees-Mogg said that it appeared some civil servants were briefing against their country. Perhaps more tellingly, it roused Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, to write a scathing admonishment. He said that the civil servants quoted were acting ultra vires and flagrantly in breach of the people's instruction to leave the EU. The full extent of the injury to the UK's national interests caused by Philby and the other British spies for the Soviet Union will never be known. However, it is clear that it led to scores of intelligence networks behind the Iron Curtain being rolled up, and the then murder of the thousands of brave men and women who formed them, as well as the failure of countless operations against the Eastern Bloc. Beyond the intelligence duel, it gave the Soviet Union a huge boost in technology, military affairs and nuclear weapons. It almost irreparably damaged Britain's relations with the CIA and the FBI, who not unreasonably grew reticent to share intelligence with such a leaky vessel. Despite some of the Eurosceptic right's more lurid descriptions, the EU cannot be compared with the Soviet Union, and it does not present the same category of existential threat to Britain. However, as we have seen, its interests diverge from ours. For example, the EU would like to integrate Britain as the continent of Europe's preeminent military power into EU defence structures. It would like to weaken the City of London's lead in the financial sector. It made the prevention of the UK's ability to economically outcompete the EU the focus of its withdrawal agreement and trade deal negotiations. It has attempted to keep the UK entirely within the EU's legal, foreign and regulatory orbit. The Northern Ireland Protocol is living evidence of the continued diversion of interests. Also, unlike the Soviet Union, the EU does not have a powerful equivalent of the KGB. It is true that the French and Germans hold formidable intelligence agencies, but neither is likely to be aggressively recruiting agents to penetrate the higher reaches of the British state. Indeed, MI6, MI5 and GCHQ will begin sharing intelligence with them as they face common enemies. This does not mean, however, that the Allies will eschew spying on each other altogether. For instance, in 2015, it emerged that the NSA, the US equivalent of GCHQ, had targeted 125 phone numbers of top German officials for long-term surveillance, including those of Angela Merkel and her predecessor as German Chancellor, Gerhard Schroeder, in an operation that lasted for decades. Nor are we Brits above such actions. Between 1960 and 1963, MI5 and GCHQ were able to read cipher traffic to and from the French embassy in London as part of Operation Stockade. Besides, neither the French or the Germans would have to aggressively recruit at all. As we have seen, there are senior, current and former politicians and civil servants arrogant and solipsistic enough to believe that their own view of the British interest is correct, even if it contradicts that expressed by the people, and to collude against Her Majesty's government to get what they want. Many do not even bother to hide their disdain for Britain and openly admit to feeling more loyalty to Europe than to Britain. This is not new. To beat a dead horse, George Orwell wrote in 1941 that the English intelligentsia are Europeanized and ashamed of their own nationality. He went so far to claim that it is unquestionably true that any English intellectual would feel more ashamed of standing to attention during God Save the King than of stealing from the poor box. The EU necessarily sinks rapaciously thirsty roots deep into its member state structures of sovereignty, law, identity and democracy. It has thus provided a new focal point for the British intelligentsia's anti-British Europeanisation. The economist Sir Paul Collier argues that the well-educated metropolitans have gradually peeled off from shared national identity. The option of being European has perhaps been a convenient justification for them to withdraw from obligations to their provincial fellow citizens. We must not precipitate a McCarthyite witch hunt, but it is perhaps better to ask now whether any of the well-educated metropolitans at the heart of the British establishment are going beyond the withdrawal of their obligations and are acting, as Dearlove put it, ultra vires. Thank you for listening to this Bournbrook essay. You can read our print issues and online articles at bournbrookmag.com, and you can support Bournbrook at bournbrookmag.com/subscribe.